Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has pledged to fight a new Texas law allowing state authorities to prosecute migrants entering the United States from Mexico. Texas Governor Greg Abbott said the goal of the bill is to, quote, stop the tidal wave of illegal entry into Texas. Here's a bit more from Abbott at the bill's signing.
Now they're going to have the ability to arrest them and prosecute them, make them subject to jail. This law I'm about to sign will fund many more miles of wall and barrier just like this. Senate Bill 3 will help to deter illegal immigration and support our law enforcement response to the Biden border crisis.
Donald Trump recently had this to say about immigrants entering the United States during a rally in New Hampshire this past weekend.
They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done.
When asked about Trump's remarks, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell reportedly said, quote, well, it strikes me that didn't bother him when he appointed Elaine Chao Secretary of Transportation, referring to his wife who immigrated to the United States from Taiwan when she was 8 years old.
And Donald Trump has subsequently besmirched 1,000 times over. He keeps calling her names.
Yeah, it was interesting. Some people were reading that as him defending Trump, saying, well, he doesn't care about immigrants.
I don't think he was doing that.
Because he appointed him.
He was showing the hypocrisy of Trump.
I thought it was a defense of his wife and a dig at Trump.
That's what I thought, too.
But I did see some liberals saying, oh, this is unconscionable. He'll even throw his wife under the bus in a defense of Donald Trump.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's what he was doing. I think he was pointing out that didn't matter to Trump so much. Again, I think Trump was obviously very imprecise and probably maybe meant illegal immigrants, not all immigrants. I mean, everyone was an immigrant at some point, so that doesn't make a lot of sense. But
almost everyone.
Okay, yes. So Mexico's objection. So I bet I can guess what Mexico's objection to this bill is. As I was just reading. So this, if you are you can be arrested for being in the country illegally, and it's a 6 months jail sentence on the first offense, and then a 20-year sentence the second time, and then you're deported. But you can waive the jail time if you agree to self-deport to Mexico, regardless of whether you are actually from Mexico. So I can imagine the Mexican government, in some ways, this would just be putting illegal immigrants from elsewhere into the U.S. than into Mexico. Yeah. So they're not going to like that.
I mean, look, Almo's specific pushback that he's given so far is that this is an abridgment of due process rights. He has implored Mexican Americans to not vote for conservatives, for Abbott, for Donald Trump because of these policies. He pointed out that that Texas, like 10 states, the United States of America, all used to be Mexico and have large Mexican American populations, and that this is an attack on them as well. We'll see how far those kinds of arguments go. When I first read that he was planning to challenge the law, I balked a little, saying, well, what standing does he have? It is interesting that he's right, that people are being put in this coercive position where they have to face up to 20 years in jail, or alternatively self-deport back to a country that they might not have a legal right to be in themselves. So it's messy. Right. And of course, as we discussed earlier this week, there is this question of whether or not a state has the right to preempt federal jurisdiction over immigration questions in the first instance, regardless of how you feel about the political contours of this particular disagreement.
Right. So since we talked about this yesterday, I was thinking about in greater detail of how I would feel about this. Obviously, I don't want the government to harass people, or bother people, or even have anything to do with people, really. So the idea of police officers or government officials asking everyone to see
show me your papers.
Yeah, that's not something I want the government going around and doing. If you've committed some crime, is it horrible if the police, after arresting you for, I don't know, let's say violence, domestic violence, or harass, some serious crime, and then they can ask your legal status? That doesn't bother me so much, but I would want the person held accountable for the underlying crime anyway. So I don't know what we're getting at here. Again, if it was the case that we had waves and waves and waves of immigrants who were responsible for all of this new crime, I could see the justification. But as we discussed yesterday, it really isn't. It's not specific to immigrants or illegal immigrants. Crime is off the charts in Washington, D.C. largest murder rate this year in years and years and years. We're like the carjacking capital of the United States right now. It's not immigrants doing it. It has nothing to do with illegal immigration. It's a huge problem, needs to be addressed, is not an immigration problem.
It is also worth noting there was a huge story earlier this week, many outlets covering it. Right now I'm reading from the Washington Post, pointing out that despite what public perception is, crime declined in the third quarter of 2023 relative to the same quarter in 2022. Crime is down 8% in jurisdictions that reported data that represent 3/4 of the United States, where the United States American residents live. So while, of course, there are discrete areas where crime is up, overall, despite the impression that you're getting in the news, crime is, in fact, down. But back to your point about the misapplication of a law like this, I mean, it's not far-fetched to imagine traffic stops being set up. Ostensibly, they do this sometimes to look for drunk driving, but to, in the process of that, ask people for their papers. You have to ask yourself, who is it that's going to be stopped routinely by the police based on the look of their criminality? Are Latino Americans, Mexican Americans, who are in large numbers in the state of Texas, going to be subject to disproportionate policing because they can be credibly stopped over and pulled over on the suspicion of being an undocumented immigrant? And while you imagine a scenario where there is an underlying crime that leads to some follow-up about their immigration status, you could also imagine a world where the underlying crime is suspicion of having an illegal immigration status that then leads to them being disproportionately stopped and frisked and surveilled and arrested for other kinds of crimes. So,
I don't think they should pull you over for speeding and then ask for your documentation. That's not what we want going on.
Right. But if if history is any indication, these kinds of laws are abused in exactly those sorts of ways. So there are huge civil liberty implications here. And I don't think AMLO is wrong to say to Mexican Americans, this affects you regardless of you being an American. So we'll see where this goes. It is a really fascinating move also to not see some more thought going into a law like this. You know it's going to face some significant court challenges. You saw how this went down when they tried to pass a law like this in Arizona, and to have a detail like maybe don't force people who aren't Mexican to self-deport to Mexico in there. It just seems like an obvious own goal.
Yeah.
All right, stick around with us. We'll have more Rising for you right after this.